Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for our second YLYP meeting of the 2025-2027 term for NGO CSW. My name is Emily Van Vleck. I am one of the co-chairs for the YLYP um, focus group or subcommittee, and I'm joined here with Mads Menaher, my fellow co-chair. It's such an honor to have you here with us this afternoon, evening, morning, wherever in the world you're joining us from, as we discuss UN youth engagement mechanisms. I know that for many of us youths, when we're first engaging in UN work, it's really difficult to determine where you can enter, what work is available, and how to make your work the most effective as a youth advocate. So this is a really exciting program for us to be putting on. We've got some really fantastic speakers for you. We're going to be putting today's program in the chat. So our NGO CSW team, if you could get the program link in the chat for us. We'd also like to share that we do accept, we have an open application for folks if you are interested in helping to plan these events and join our small but mighty team, YLYP team. So the link for that application is going in the chat now. Um, and then we'd like to remind you that our next meeting is going to be on the 6th of January, same time, 11 a.m. Eastern. Um, and that meeting will be on the topic of CSW revitalization and movement building. So we hope that you're able to join us. The registration is in the chat. If you missed our last meeting for November, which was focused on Beijing plus 30 and adapting those strategies for the modern era of feminism and gender equality. That recording is available on our YouTube channel, so please check that out. And I am going to go ahead and pass it over to Mads, who is going to moderate and introduce our fabulous speakers. So over to you, Mads.
Thank you so much, Emily. It has been a pleasure working with you, and I have the pleasure to introduce our wonderful speakers for our panel today. So if you are new to the YLYPs, we are the YLYPs, the Youth Leaders and Young Professionals. We're a community of young people and youth advocates who are passionate about global gender equality and looking to engage in or learn about UN processes, especially leading up to the CSW. So this program today specifically is going to bring together young advocates, civil society representatives, and UN stakeholders to explore pathways for meaningful youth participation across UN processes. So based on the CSW 70 themes, we're going to explore the variety of engagement mechanisms that can be used to advocate for gender equality in UN spaces. So I am going to go ahead and get us started by introducing our speakers. Let me see if I can get them spotlighted here. All right, so there we are. Here we go. Okay, we have Cairo Eubanks, who is an award-winning pageant queen and civil society advocate who bridges civil society with intergovernmental organization. She serves as chair of the DGC Civil Society Youth Representative Steering Committee, youth representative for Generations United, and co-lead for Together for SDGs. As CEO of Cairo Speaks and Cairo Writes, she provides strategic consulting and business development support, drawing on extensive experience partnering with local organizations, corporations, UN bodies, and intergovernmental agencies to drive sustainable growth. And then we have Winnie. Let me see. Who is a Ugandan youth advocate and strategic communications professional with experience in public diplomacy, gender equality, youth development, and advocacy. Globally, she has held leadership roles with Generation Democracy and UNFPA, advancing youth political participation and inclusive development. As founder of We Talk Series Uganda, she amplifies youth voices on gender, leadership, and diplomacy. She is also recognized with awards such as the Youth Champion Menstrual Health Advocate Award for 2022 and the Top 40 Under 40 Africa. We also have Renata, who is an award-winning Brazilian climate advocate and founder of Em- Empodera Clima. I'm so sorry if I butchered that. A youth-led organization advancing feminist climate action and climate justice across Latin America and the Caribbean. She is a Forbes 30 Under 30 honoree, former Global Youth Fellow with NGO CSW, and Generation 17 Young Leader. Renata has held leaders in UN Women, the World Economic Forum, and the UN Youth Office that holds and holds a Master of Public Policy from Harvard University. And then finally, we have Stefania, who is a public policy specialist on peace building and peace, security, and humanitarian action specialist for UN Women. Welcome all. Thank you so much for being here. So to start off the panel, we are going to go ahead and just ask that you each introduce yourselves, tell us about your work and your experience as a young advocate and within the UN processes. So I will go ahead and turn it over to Cairo first. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mads. Can everyone hear me? All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Kyra Eubanks, and I'm a global civil society advocate, strategic communications consultant, and champion for youth empowerment, women's economic empowerment, and intentional intergenerational collaboration. I currently serve as the youth representative for Generations United to the United Nations, and I co-lead Together for SDGs, an intergenerational initiative I helped to co-found after serving as an intergenerational and youth subcommittee co-chair for the 2024 United Nations Civil Society Conference in Nairobi, Kenya, which was the first time that the conference had ever been held on the African continent or the Global South, which was truly exciting and an honor. And I'm humbled to share that this past week, I was recently appointed as an ambassador for peace for the Universal Peace Federation, an ECOSOC accredited NGO. My work sits at the intersection of storytelling, systems change, and strategic bridge building. I help civil society leaders and organizations, including intergovernmental partners and civil society organizations, design deeper pathways for youth leadership, community-driven solutions, and intergenerational engagement that is strategic and intentional. My background is, and how I came to navigate some of these UN and intergovernmental spaces is that I actually entered UN spaces when I was in college as a college student. And like many of you, my pathway was not at all linear whatsoever. My first major step came when I became a youth representative for New Future Foundation under the mentorship of Queen Mother Dr. Delois Blakely, who has represented the voices of women and youth of the African diaspora at the UN for decades. She taught me the deeply practical realities, how language and negotiations shift the direction of outcomes, how advocacy travels across departments and organizations, which doors are open and which requires a strategy before you can even knock, which is so important. And importantly, how to identify and use the sometimes invisible feedback mechanisms that allow youth to share ideas directly with UN agencies and departments. How young people can enter these decision-making and leadership spaces even when the pathway isn't immediately clear. These are things that you simply cannot know at the beginning. You need mentorship, you need translation, you need guidance, you need someone to give you the map and then show you how to read it. I remain profoundly grateful to Queen Mother Dr. Blakely for modeling what it looks like with integrity, history, and joy, and for showing me firsthand the power of intergenerational continuity. I also am so grateful for the UN staff members and civil society leaders who have invested in me, including dear colleagues like Hawa Taylor Kamara Diallo, who is the former chief of the DGC Civil Society Unit and now is the executive director of the IB Taylor Kamara Foundation. She's a trusted mentor and friend, and I'm so grateful. So, in short, really what I want to share is that this is why youth empowerment matters. This is why intergenerational collaboration matters in terms of my background and understanding that this is why tomorrow's young advocates and today's young advocates deserve smoother pathways than the ones many of us had to struggle to find. As I grew in my advocacy, I began working closely with UN entities through side events, dialogues, workshops, different sessions for CSW, and even International Youth Day. Each space revealed both the promise and the complexity of youth engagement, the moments where youth were integrated meaningfully, and the moments where youth were positioned symbolically. A truly pivotal experience for me was using the cumulative knowledge, skill sets, and networks gained through the DGC Civil Society Youth Representative Steering Committee in my role serving as an intergenerational and youth subcommittee co-chair for the 2024 UN Civil Society Conference in Nairobi, Kenya. In Nairobi, standing alongside my colleagues, which is my intergen twin, I like to call her my intergen twin, Dr. Kristen Bodiford of Generations United, and youth leader Peter Amundi of Global Youth Forum, we made a very intentional decision while we were in Nairobi that the work would not end when the Nairobi conference ended. And out of that commitment, Together for SDGs was born, a global initiative that brings younger and older change makers together to co-design SDG-aligned, community-rooted, measurable solutions. In closing, Nairobi reminded me of something essential. Youth engagement becomes transformative when it is designed, not improvised. And when young people are integrated alongside older leaders, the solutions become richer, more contextual, and more sustainable. This is the lens through which I approach all of my work today. As an advocate, as a strategist, and as someone deeply committed to building intergenerational ecosystems that actually work. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was so informational, and it was really great to hear, how you got to where you are and your background. So thank you so much. Winnie, did you want to go ahead and share, a little bit about you?
Yes. Can I have my video off so my internet doesn't break?
Yes, that's totally fine.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm in a low connection area. So yeah, my name is Winnie Akidedile, and I'm a youth advocate with over 8 years. This is my ninth year actually on strategic communications on youth health and gender equality within the spheres of Uganda, as well as also the regional and the global forums. Initially, my work has spanned basically from digital communications, whereas basically using communications for advocacy and to see how best we can amplify the voices of young people given the fact that we live in an era where technology is advancing daily, but then as young people, we didn't really have ways or avenues to get into the field of advocacy. So I decided to focus more on how best I could use technology and leverage on it for evidence-based advocacy. And that's actually what spanned my work into joining governance, which at some point opened my whole work around advocacy. And that is where I got to engage with platforms such as the UN Women, Generation Democracy, and SEPs. And that is where my work spanned one aspect where I was looking at pushing for inclusive participation of young people in that the particular groups of young people, for example, those with disabilities who are often left out of discussions and as trying to forge ways in which we could engage them in the conversations, not just at our community levels, but opening up avenues and platforms where they can engage with leaders, both at national, at regional, and at global levels. And that also took me as far as engaging in conversations around policy, not just within my country, but with an aspect of being part of the global network of young leaders who are pushing for policy and governance issues within their country. And that is where my work around policy began. Now, the work around policy basically focused on inclusivity as well as active engagement in that I benchmarked a lot on deriving toolkits, working with different partners on deriving toolkits as well as localizing content because oftentimes as the African youths, we always called upon to participate in these engagements. For example, the CSW, the UN high-level engagements, but it usually stops at the point where you're invited to speak at panels. But then what would happen next after the panel when we come back home? So that is the aspect of where my work around policy and then meaningful engagement had to come up, in that I had to forge a way in that we could actually create platforms where these young people, after the engagements at those forums, how would they would come back and start engaging with the others. But then remember, every work that is discussed at those high-level panels, you often had to come back to our governments, to our leaders at the countries that we hail from. So in that accord, we derived a program called the Youth Jam, which was an incorporation of Accountability Forum within the We Talk Series Uganda project. And that was a platform where, as young leaders within Uganda, young people, irrespective of your background, your education background, your level of education, your district, because Uganda has over 152 districts that are on that side you call counties. So this was an accountability forum that would bring all young people, irrespective of the leadership positions that they hold, to an accountability platform where we hold the leaders who are in charge of distributing our resources, who are in charge of making the policies, as well as when it came to avenues of consultations, when it came to policy reforms, as well as influencing conversations, when it came to developing position papers that are presented at CSW or the UN engagements. So this platform was more of like opening up an opportunity for the young people who cannot travel for these international engagements to be able to hold their leaders accountable and be able to input their voices and opinions in these position papers. Much as they're putting the opinions, it's also a platform for them to hold these leaders accountable. But then the question of how we always, as young people, we always holding our leaders accountable, but then the question of who holds us accountable. We're always demanding from our leaders, but then who demands accountability from us? Because it's also our mandate to ensure that we are accountable for everything that we want. So this was more of like a check facts setting where we hold them accountable and they also hold us accountable. In so doing, I would actually maybe call that a safe space where you don't pinch your friend on the face, but it's an open platform, a forum where you'd always be able to speak your mind and have these leaders respond to you, and also have the young people be questioned on the engagements they're doing. So that is what we did. And the aspect of including young people with disability, that's where it all came up with the evidence-based bit, where we incorporated sign language inclusion in every engagement we were doing, because we did realize that young people who were hard of speech and hearing were not being engaged in these platforms. So engaging them in these conversations using sign language was actually an inclusive accountability forum where these people whose voices using sign language were actually heard. And that also spanned to the fact that we were doing the health communication systems where we incorporated this. And in such doing, we were able to realize equity and also ensure that there was a balance of gender equality in every engagement that we did, so that everyone's voices, every young person's voice was heard in this. And that is what we did for around 5 years, until the young people who were with, whom we started this engagement with, had to, out of the mentorship that we did, because we were able to mentor over 100 young people with disabilities vis-a-vis young people from other avenues. So after the mentorship, these young people were able to now start standing up for themselves. And I can proudly say the young people who I've mentored and are now working for the UN, who are working in different civil society engagements. And right now, as I speak, there are those who are actually on the front line of conversations around the Beijing declarations, around the CSW conversations that are happening. So this is basically the work I've been doing for the last 8-9 years. And this year I joined government, and that's why I am currently at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And I hope with public diplomacy, maybe we could use soft power right here to influence policies from the government perspective, because with a background in civil society, I believe being here is also an avenue that allows me to change the mindset of our institutional leaders, because oftentimes they say we're the problem, but now that I'm inside, maybe you never know, it could be a chance that we could realize gender equality in the government institutions. Otherwise, thank you.
Thank you so much. It really is inspiring to hear all of these stories. And I think it's important that, we hold our leaders accountable, and we also hold ourselves accountable. So thank you so much for highlighting that. I will go ahead and move over to Renata.
Sounds good. Can you hear me okay? How is the internet? Okay, because at this point of the year, I think it's, everyone's tired, including the Wi-Fi, the internet. And I speak for myself because I just got back actually from COP30, the UN climate conference in Belém. I'm from Brazil, but I'm from the south of Brazil, and Belém is in the north. So it's a long trip still. And I just spent the past 3 weeks or so there hosting many events, many engagements, and leading a 15 young women delegation to COP30 with my NGO. So I'm definitely at the latter end of energy, but it's of course a great pleasure to be here. I was a global youth fellow of NGO CSW this year, so I was at CSW in New York back in March, and it was such an incredible time. Especially, and this is kind of the gist of what I'm going to talk about, but especially having, a scholarship, being supported. I think that's the kind of thing that being a young person that's also trying to pay their bills, also trying to, live life and do advocacy in a way that you have peace of mind, that you can help your family. I think these things are really important. And it's a lot of what I've advocated on a more personal level in my work. Just to introduce myself a bit more, I've been in the climate space since I was a teenager, so like 10 years or so at this point. I went to COP21 back in 2015 in Paris as a first year college student. I had the opportunity to go with a Brazilian youth NGO, and I think being in that space so young really allowed me to first understand the weight and responsibility that it is to access these spaces, and also just the urgent need that exists to have more young people there. And I mean, the strike difference between attending COP21 in Paris to now COP30, seeing the level of civil society engagement, I think to me really shows why we need more young people, more civil society engaged in these processes. I think it renews the processes, it makes them more exciting, and it shows the stake that these negotiations have, right? Whether it is climate or gender, which are both areas that I work with. My NGO works at the intersection of gender and climate justice, Empodera Clima, with a youth perspective, and so truly that's at the gist, at the core of what I do, is getting more young women, more young people into climate decision making spaces. And even just hearing Winnie, now working in diplomacy, I think that's really where it's at, because I have friends that, were with me in the first few COPs that we attended and are now lead gender negotiators for their countries at COPs, right? They're leading the delegations because they've had the opportunity as a young person to follow them. I have another friend who launched a huge climate philanthropy for young people worldwide. And so, again, when you give young people the opportunity to have a say in these spaces, to be able to follow these negotiations, to be at the table, I think it really changes the trajectory of these young people, and we're able to just have more thoughtful leaders, more ambitious leaders, people that understand, right? Because I think that's again what it means to be a young person in these spaces. It's not, you don't know anything, you're just there to learn. I mean, you also have things to share, and I think what I've seen is that we absorb that knowledge so much that we are quickly able to bring something back to our communities in that sense. So that's what happened for me. I went to COP21 and to a couple other huge conferences, CSW, and I went back home to my city in the south of Brazil, and I saw, okay, people are not talking about this. A lot of documents and conversations are not translated also in different languages, right? In Portuguese, for example. Things have changed, but still I think the level of accessibility when it comes to language, to visas, to even passports. I've had Brazilian friends that couldn't get to COP because you needed a passport to sign up for COP and get a badge, even though it was in Brazil, right? And so, and I mean, we know this super well with CSW and who can get to New York City, especially now, right? And so I think my main message, as someone that has been in these spaces for so many years, is that we need to create very stable and concrete structures to engage young people in these spaces. Because for me, being part of spaces like Yango, which is the youth constituency of the UN climate space, helped to know who to talk to, where I could engage. And just to give you an example, I was the gender focal point for several years within Yango in the climate space. And now I'm good friends with the main gender expert at UN Climate, right? And it's not only, oh, that's cool, you have a friend. It's like you have an ally when you're looking to implement gender mainstream climate agendas, right? I can go up to her, which I did during COP, and we talked about what was working, what wasn't. And I think that adds and enriches the conversation, right? And so just the importance of the network that you build and the access that you can have in these spaces is super important. And I'll just finalize going back to what I started saying, which is the pay and the funding, right? Because I've been doing this work for many years, many of them volunteer, which is a privilege, right? At the same time, I was juggling many other things. This is the first year actually with almost 7 years that I've led my NGO that I've been able to do it full time, and it hasn't been great financially, right? And so you're also juggling a lot of different priorities with that responsibility and weight that is put on young people to solve the crisis, right? Or your voice is so important. You need to do this, you need to do that. And so that's where I'm at currently. I'm trying to find ways, even if it's a little stipend here and there for the young people that we invite in our programming to come speak at a workshop that we do or do a training, things like that, mentorship programs that we do to pay them, even if it's a little, things like that, right? I think kind of changes the narrative a little bit of who can be an expert, who can be in these spaces, and it makes such a difference. Like especially the global north, global south correlation, like being part of programs that are able to support you very little in dollars or euros for us in the global south in Latin America, it makes such a big difference, right? And it allows more people to be in these spaces, and that's what I've seen and what I've tried to do with my NGO. So that's why we were able to have 15 young women at COP in Brazil, which of course, it's closer. We were able to do that, but I think just seeing the spark in their eye and the excitement of being in these spaces, of meeting the people that they connect with online, made such a big difference. And so I hope this can inspire you all and everyone listening to include meaningfully more young people, funding them whenever it's possible, and believing in the power of the work that they do, because these are people that I've seen literally in the span of 5 to 10 years become the decision makers, and much better decision makers than we've had for several decades. And so that's where I'll end on. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Renata, thank you so much. I think you brought up some really great points, especially being supported financially, the power in numbers, and creating structures that really support youth and continue building their leadership skills. So thank you so much. I want to turn it over to Stefania, who has a short presentation on some of the ways that youth can get engaged and some advice that UN Women can offer us. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, and then we'll get into some questions after.
Sure, Matt. Thank you so much. It's very, very inspiring to be amongst such a talented group of young women. I'm not that young anymore, but I can still share a little bit of how my pathway has been and how are things from the side of the UN. And then, as Matt said, share a presentation on specifically on what we're doing for CSW 70. But let me first tell you a little bit about myself. So I'm a policy specialist on gender responsive peace building at UN Women, and I'm also the focal point for youth peace and security. And before, I was with our office in the Americas and the Caribbean, also covering peace and security, and with our office in Afghanistan, coordinating our humanitarian response. And so most of my work really focuses on making sure that young women's leadership is not treated as something that is on the side, but that is central to how the UN is understanding peace, prevention, and recovery. And so I work sort of coordinating global processes, from the peace building architecture review to Secretary General's reports, or the independent progress study on youth peace and security, which you may be familiar with. And I support our country offices and partners who are pushing and working towards inclusive approaches on the ground. And so a big part of my role is really connected what young women are doing and are saying across different regions to these decision-making spaces to make sure that they shape policies and that resources, both technical and financial, reach them and their initiatives. And a little bit about how to advocate within the UN system. Given that my experience is a bit of a mix between being in the UN and previously I worked with governments and with civil society, I would say that something that I've learned is that political openings really don't appear automatically, obviously, that you really have to push for them, especially when you work on gender or youth that tend to be agendas that are sidelined. No matter where you are, even when you're, I don't know, in governments or in positions of power, still, in a way, you continue to be an activist because these are topics that are not guaranteed to be resorts for, right? So specifically working for the YPS agenda has also shown me how much young women peace builders are contributing on the ground, even when the systems are not built for them. So during the consultations for the Peace Building Architecture Review or now for the progress study, young women consistently have brought sharper analysis and of conflict drivers within their spaces, of the civic space restrictions, of the care responsibilities that heighten in moments of crisis, of the climate impacts, and the local peace infrastructures and efforts that sort of shift in these moments. And these are usually more accurate than what we even hear, on global spaces. They really capture what is happening on the ground. So being part of these processes, including of the Secretary General's report or the WPS Open Debate, the sign of the Young Women Peace Builders Peace Building Initiative has really showed me that young women can influence global policy for sure, but there is a need of a strong commitment on the side of the UN to have structure, resource channels to bring these priorities into the negotiations, the resolutions, and the financing decisions. Let me know if this is a good time to present, or should I go a bit later when we talk about avenues for youth engagement?
I think you can go ahead and present. I think it would be a great segue into that question, actually.
Okay, sounds good. Let me see if I can share my screen. I'm having issues with that, Mari. Would you mind that we move to the next question while I sort out how to share the screen?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm gonna go ahead and jump to the last question that I sent our speakers, which is what advice do you have for youth advocates wanting to engage in UN work and global advocacy? What are maybe some of the best avenues or some maybe a key experience that you had that you would suggest looking into, or any other information that you could share would be great. Anyone can jump in here.
So, Emmy? Can I?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, yeah. Before I jump to respond to that question, I had some bit of feedback basing on my experiences engaging with the UN systems. I don't know if that's okay, or I wait for the presentation.
Yeah, that is fine too. We also asked if we could provide some feedback for UN agencies to better engage youth. So that would be great too.
Thank you. I'll just start with that, then I'll go to the advice for the young advocates. So my feedback to the UN agencies, this is just not for the UN agencies, but any international platform or organization or entity that's working beyond the borders of a particular country that they're inviting young people from. I would often maybe advise them to not just invite these young people to speak. Inviting the young people to have speak opportunities is not going to solve the situation or the challenges that you're speaking around gender equality, inclusion, or participation and all that sort, because oftentimes people are just sitting on the back here waiting for an opportunity to speak, and it's the only time that they get to travel out of their country. So once that is done, what next? So I believe to engage these young people, let's go beyond tokenism and ensure that we include these young people when it comes to shaping the agendas of the conversations, the objectives of these events. For example, CSW is coming up. Let's engage these young people to shape the agenda of CSW right from the grassroots, because I do believe these conversations start from the local communities in our countries, then it goes to the national levels, then it goes to regionals, until it reaches the NGO CSW status quo, where it meets in New York. Then maybe also I'd like to give feedback when it comes to investing in the capacity building. I know oftentimes there's conversations around mentoring young people, investing on young people, but then these young people that you are mentoring, that you're giving platforms to speak on these platforms or on these international events, how sure are you that they are going back and mentoring the rest of the young people behind? Because capacity building should not only stop with one person. So how are you, or what systems do you have to hold these leaders accountable, these young people that you give the opportunities? How strong are you having that accountability forum for them to go back and build the capacity of those young people who cannot make it to national, regional, international places, as well as investing in the capacity of these leaders on how they can track budgeting processes within their countries, because commitments are made at CSW events, international platform events. And these are conversations when it comes to budgeting that has to go back to our governments. So how strong is the capacity of these young people to go back and influence their governments to ensure that they allocate budgetings that will incorporate actions around gender equality, around any work that pushes for the gender equality or the involvement of young women or youth health or youth conversations within their country, as well as these young people that we are bringing to these platforms. How do we build their capacity on policy writing and also negotiations aspects? Because currently, there's something that we really call young people in diplomacy. We need to build the capacity of young people to be able to negotiate these things that we need, the policies, the resources, the budgeting, the representations. Because when it comes down to the local communities, the countries that we come from, it also goes back to negotiating who is going to represent in these international platforms. So if we can build the capacity around that or negotiating, that would really be good. And then when it comes to funding youth-led initiatives directly, youth-led organizations need resources, not just invitations to the events. And then if we can prioritize inclusion, and for inclusion, it's not just persons with disabilities, we need to include inclusion of rural youth, because these conversations that we are having at international platforms, we are discussing issues that are highly affecting young people in the rural communities. Because, for example, when it comes to Africa, I come from Uganda. Uganda, we all know Kampala, but there are very many districts and regions beyond Kampala. Then the question comes to, how is that young person who is over 4,000 kilometers away from Kampala able to access information or conversations around CSW? Do they even know, or can they interpret what gender-based violence is? Can they interpret what policy is? Do they understand all this? So how can we create platforms where we get those young people who are actually faced with the realities of experiencing these issues from the rural communities, and navigate how we can bring them to these platforms? Because oftentimes these invitations stop at elite youths who are in the urban settings, in the city setting, those who've had education, who've gone to universities, but then those whom these conversations we are having for to change their lives are not actually having access to this. And then finally, around feedback, maybe my feedback is around strengthening feedback loops after the consultations, after this conversation we are having, after the engagements in CSW. How do we ensure that young people see their contributions, and how sure are they that how do we have that their contributions are influencing the final outcomes of the documentations that come out at these forums and these platforms that we engage in? So for me, I do believe ensuring that the feedback loopholes actually strengthened, are synthesized, and we don't have these conversations where we only hold you, the CSW team, or any other platform accountable without holding us accountable on what we have gone back home to do. That would really be something we really need to streamline. And also in the sense of the fact that your entity is putting in money, you need to also hold us accountable, not just coming to sit in the air conditioners and sit and have these conversations at these meetings and enjoy the scenery. But then when we come back home, how are we holding these leaders back here accountable and also giving back reporting mechanisms back to you? So when it comes to advising the young people, this I'll advise from a perspective of I was there, I was also young then, because I started advocacy when I was literally, let's say in grade 1, and it was around HIV/AIDS advocacy, but I jointly got into policy when I was 17 years. And there always came that question of how are you doing this and all that sort. Because when people started seeing me engaging in international platforms, they kept having those questions. And personally, my social media is always answering questions to young people. And my response has always been, let's start local as young people, as young advocates. There's no way you're going to get to the UN entities if you do not start from the grassroots, from the communities, your neighbors at home. Because global advocacy is powerful, but credibility is built by understanding and addressing issues in your own community first. So if you can understand the challenges that are having in your community and you start the advocacy straight from the communities, from your neighbor, that's how you can build your credibility and go to the district level, to the national, to the regional. And that's how entities like the international platforms, the UN, CSW can actually pick you up. And that's the only way you can build your credibility, with evidence of the work you have been doing. And then building your expertise, because knowing your issue is deeply rooted in how best you can articulate them, how best you can relate with the challenges or the issues you're trying to address, how best you can relate with the policy matters in your community, in your country, and if you understand the statistics of the issue that you're trying to address, as well as the history of its sort. So that enables you as a young person to speak with authority, because you're not going to go to a UN entity and speak like someone who's just negotiating for water. You have to speak with authority and power. Show them that you understand what you're speaking for. And also the people who invite you to speak on these platforms are not going to invite someone who doesn't even understand what they're speaking about. And that takes you back to how much have you invested in building your expertise to understand the challenge of or the issue that you're trying to address. And that will also give you the capacity to be able to negotiate your way through when it comes to policy, budget resourcing, and also influence the conversations when it comes to building the outcome documents, because you're speaking from an experience or a lived experience perspective, as well as living the daily realities of how advocacy works. And then showing up consistently. You've seen scenarios where a young person shows up for CSW, let's say in 2022, had that experience, she comes back to the country, disappears for 1 year, comes back the next time when you give them an opportunity, or the next time when they see fit, they want to travel. So it all takes you back to how consistent are you in showing up when you're called to speak? And that consistency has to translate to the community you're in. Are you always with your community? Because many opportunities come for being present. And that takes you to the aspect of volunteering. Personally, I volunteered for 7 years. All the work I have been doing for gender equality has been volunteering. I have never been employed. I have never really received salary when it comes to full employment on a contract. All this work has been volunteering, and that is an aspect that also tests your passion. It's not me saying that as young people, you need to go out there and volunteer. No, if it's an avenue for you to join, to get into the space, learn a skill, you never know. Your volunteering could end within 1 year and you could grow your skill in that. But for some people, it will take you years to do that. So taking up those opportunities of volunteering is one way you can show up consistently and also contributing to the discussions, even before formal recognitions arrives, because oftentimes no one will see you. If you always show up for sideline conversations, for example, conversations like this we are having, or in any other platform, because normally most of these platforms usually have engagements monthly, quarterly. If you always show up and share your opinions, share the feedbacks from your community, it will show the organizers that you are consistent and you have interest in this. And then speaking around networking strategically, if we can engage youth in platforms, for example, the platforms I've worked in AFRIAN, which is the African Youth and Adolescent Health Network, Generation Democracy, UNFPA Youth Networks, I think that is one of the avenues that the young people can actually engage if they want to get into the UN platforms, because oftentimes the young people that we are working with want to wake up straight from starting advocacy to jumping into the pan, that is the UN. But remember, you can't get to the UN without starting small from the platforms within your country, because the platforms within your countries, those small networks actually encourage and help you. They help build your capacity locally, because it's quite challenging to go in an international space and start negotiating with people when you don't really understand the avenues of the background of your country. So I really advise that if we as young people can engage within the local context of the platforms we're in, that way we can grow our capacity. And in such doing, on the other hand, the UN entities, for example, CSW, I would also advise in this particular opportunity is to build and to boost the network for the young people. Maybe you start looking at networking with youth platforms within the countries that you engage with, not going for hand individuals, because not going for organizations, but they're usually platforms that are embedded within country systems or within civil society. And right now, civil society organizations are pushing for collaborations, youth platforms, movement building. So if there's a way that the CSW Forum can actually work with those platforms within the countries, they'll be able to pick up and source out the young people who can actually be able to push for the genders that they really want the countries to realize. And then finally, I believe with the fact that technology is advancing, we need to push for the use of digital platforms where advocacy today is hybrid, communication is power, and we seek mentorship online. So find people who understand the UN systems and they can guide you through the complexity of it. Because oftentimes when you're reading alone on the documents, it really looks complex. The language being used is very heavy. Just recently, the UN published a report that their reports are never read by people. So oftentimes, you can actually leverage on the power of social media to meet up with young people or international people who actually understand these systems, and they'll really take you through this. And then finally, just believe in your voice. Young people often wait for permission to speak, but global spaces need your authenticity and the lived experiences. And that's the only way you can actually build your momentum and build your credibility and show the people out there that you understand and you can get on these systems and these platforms. Because the truth is, the UN system, CSW, is not for the weak. You don't trust your strength, you don't trust your negotiation, do not step there. Personally, I know I have all this experience because for once, I have feared stepping in that platform because I do not trust my negotiation skills, because people are reading, young people are reading, people are invested in pushing for the agendas of their country. So by the time you're stepping in that platform, know that you're able to negotiate. You can speak power to the issues that you want addressed within your country system. So that's all I really have to share.
Great. Thank you so much. Does anyone else want to jump in?
Yes, I had my hand raised, and that's because there was just so much that you said, Winnie, that immediately aligned with me. And so what I'll do is a similar sort of setup. I'll try to be concise yet comprehensive, but just really building upon what Winnie had shared. I mean, there are some positive aspects of what I've seen with the UN and youth engagement. You know, for example, I've seen a genuine commitment from many UN entities to strengthen UN engagement, or youth engagement, specifically the UN Youth Office, of course, whose consistent outreach through social media and newsletters and open calls for participation has created clear, actionable pathways for youth to get involved. And I'm not just saying that. This is based off of my experience in terms of access to resources or to know, like the UN Youth Compass, right? That the UN Youth Office has been championing. There's so many links, dates, deadlines that you can be able to submit applications, or even what the UN Youth Office is doing now is event mapping 2026. So let's say, for example, your organization is has some programming in mind for 2026 and you want it to be on the UN Youth Office's radar. There's a pathway to do that. That's not, that wasn't as accessible, 5, 10 years ago, at least not for me. I can only speak for myself. But another positive development has been the rise of virtual programs and hybrid convening, similar to what when he was saying, so many young people I speak to, they do share that securing visas remains one of the biggest barriers to participating in UN spaces, even when they are invited or select to speak. I could go on and on about some of the colleagues that I've worked with closely. Me, just being so frustrated and trying to help. I remember there was one colleague I was working with. trying to secure a visa for that person went all the way to state government, right? Just to get away, and they still had trouble securing their visa and they were not able to come to the US when they had planned, and it was just really heartbreaking. So I realized that it's a challenge that a lot of young people and people around the world are facing in terms of securing visa and access. So what I will say is that virtual access, it does not solve everything, but it does meaningfully expand who can learn, contribute, and be seen, especially youth without the financial means or documentation required for global travel. One thing that I would say in terms of meaningful opportunities to deepen youth engagement across the UN system, you had talked about this, Winnie, but the way that I would coin it in a phrase is to shift from event-based engagement to pipeline-based engagement. So go from just based off of an event, a one-off circumstance, or a panel or a statement that's delivered. But oftentimes, there's no real pathway for continued involvement, leadership, or mentorship. So pipelines, a pipeline-based engagement, rather than isolated moments, it allows youth to build capacity, contribute strategically, and maintain continuity. So and another area I would also say is process clarity and procedural accessibility. So what that means is that oftentimes people, and this was my experience too, I spent so much time trying to decode the system, trying to learn mandates, trying to map entry points, figuring out how feedback travels, trying to just understand where and how to provide input. But when those pathways are more clearly communicated, it expands participation, right? Especially for youth without formal training, sponsorship, or NGO backing. And of course, because I'm coming from an intergenerational perspective, I do believe that in terms of UN youth engagement, there's immense potential in intergenerational co-creation. So when senior staff, for example, and youth problem solve together from the beginning, rather than in parallel, the outcomes reflect both institutional wisdom and emerging perspectives. And what strengthening intergenerational co-creation means is not youth working alone, not senior experts working alone, but co-designing solutions together. That idea or that model of together from the start, collaboration is really central to the work that we're doing at Together for SDGs through the Building Communities and Action framework. And it's a framework that UN departments could adapt to deepen participation and strengthen program designs. And finally, in terms of feedback to the UN, and UN systems, we need continued emphasis on operationalizing youth input, ensuring that youth contributions are not only heard but integrated. Similar to what you were sharing, Winnie, I swear we're like on the same page because this looks like establishing feedback loops, clarifying how youth recommendations inform decisions, and creating shared accountability mechanisms. It also means recognizing youth as experts as well, because listen, we're youth, but we're doing this for 5, 10 years. Okay, we're experts in this, but investing in compensated opportunities so that our advocacy can be sustained. And the last thing that I will share in terms of feedback and ideas or any sort of guidance to youth, starting to make their mark, in intergovernmental and international spaces and advocacy. One thing that I will say is, let me see, because I don't want to be redundant, but I just want to share, again, my own global advocacy, my journey expanded significantly because although it was not linear, I first started off, volunteering, working in the community. Then I transitioned to being a youth representative for an NGO that was accredited with the UN. And then I joined a steering committee, the DGC Civil Society Youth Representative Steering Committee. And what that did was that it gave me visibility, but more importantly, gave me responsibility. Right. So, supporting youth programming, advising on engagement, and collaborating with peers like Emily, who co-organized today's event. Shout out to Emily. We were on the steering committee together. So for those youth who are not part of an accredited NGO, I always encourage creative thinking. Your organization may not be directly associated with the UN, but someone in your ecosystem is or may be. Strategic partnerships can open up doors for joint programming, side events, or research contributions that give you a legitimate entry point. Another piece of advice, do the unglamorous work. So there's so much behind the scenes work of committees, consultations, drafting, coordinating events. I remember when we were doing the Nairobi conference, the Civil Society conference in 2024. I mean, I remember because I was working with teams across different time zones. I mean, I was sending out messages, communicating 3 o'clock in the morning so I could be able to reach my colleagues first thing in the morning in Nigeria, but then be up late at night so that I could be able to contact. You see, so it's not necessarily glamorous. The idea is that you're not just there to just talk or to speak, but you're there to do the work. And the whole point of being in these sort of spaces is to then communicate the work that you've done, the lived experiences, the recommendations that will actually, create measurable impact. And then the last thing that I'll say is please make sure that you stay informed. Something as simple as joining newsletters and subscribing to UN updates can really plug you into opportunities that you might miss. And so these mailing lists, I'm going to actually share a list of different newsletters that I've subscribed to that I'd love to share with you. And perhaps if you haven't already subscribed, please get connected. But these lists regularly share accreditation deadlines, event registration links, calls for speakers, youth consultations, and more. And the last thing is please stay connected. So within Together for SDGs, we're actually preparing to launch our 2025 Insights Report, expand our Intergenerational Impact Hub, and mobilize young people and partners for our International Youth Day 2026 Global Activation. These are open spaces for youth leaders, advocates, and intergenerational collaborators to grow, design, and lead. Let's stay in touch via LinkedIn. My name is Kyra Eubanks, and through the Together SDGs platform, which is currently under development, but I'll share the website in the comments. Last but not least, I just want to thank you, Emily. Thank you, Mads, for this opportunity. Thank you for allowing me to connect with so many wonderful people. And we cannot work in silos. So at the end of the day, I hope our names become familiar, those who are speaking, those who are listening, and we can find pathways to get to work together to create an impact towards the work that we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I turn it over to Stefania for a final presentation, Renata, do you have anything to add?
I realize we really don't have time. We have about 3 minutes left, and I think my colleagues have said most of the tips, so I won't go too deep into it, but just to echo everything that you all said, I think building networks is so important. It starts here, it starts with getting to know each other. And as I started saying, some of my best friends are in this space. And the last thing would just be apply to opportunities. At least that's what I did in my journey, and there's many opportunities that I applied once, twice, 3 times until I got them. And so I think that resilience of trying over and over and learning from, feedback, things like that, I think really helps. And this year I'm in 2 fellowships that reflect that, things that I've wanted to engage with in the past. One of them is with the UN Foundation. They have this incredible program called Our Future Agenda, and I'm one of 7 next generation fellows that I think really speaks to everything that we've talked about, which is working directly on these issues rather than just going and speaking, right? And so I'm the Planet Fellow, and we just hosted this huge intergenerational town hall with TED Talks, with Natura at COP, and everyone got paid to do this work. It's like everything comes together as experts doing the work. Now there's another campaign about the next UN Secretary General as well, and so I think that co-creation that you all talked about and kind of empowering each other to be in these spaces more than just speakers, which I resonate with deeply, I think is happening in a lot of organizations and spaces, including NGO CSW, and so reach out to people that inspire you, that you want to learn more from. That's what I did. And so a lot of the fellowships and programs that I'm in today came from just talking to people I admire that were in these places before. And so I think that's what you have to do. And now that's what I do to bring other people with me, right? Because we're not going to solve anything alone. We need everyone together to deal with such big problems like, gender inequality, like the climate crisis. And so I think, yes, networks and applying to things and building that resilience is super important because again, these spaces were not made for us, whether it's, women, whether it's youth, whether it's people from the global south, but we need to push our way in because we need to be there. So that's all I'll say. Thank you. I'll pass it to Stefania maybe.
Great, thank
Thank
you.
you.
Go ahead.
I know we're on time, so I can I couldn't figure out the presentation. It's too heavy to download and it's just not working, but I can maybe just quickly share some of the elements that I wanted to share with the presentation and I can send it and then you can share with the network. Would that work?
That sounds great.
Right, perfect. So just to tell you a little bit about what we're doing in terms of the preparations for CSW 70 and how are we working with youth across the process. Of course, our main goal here is to make sure that your priorities really influence the process from the start, from the design to the end, and that your priorities are reflected in the global discussions on justice reforms, and that it really connects with also the several processes that have shaped this year, Beijing Plus 30, and the wider revitalization of CSW, giving us an opportunity to really push for justice-centered, intersectional, and disability inclusive advocacy. So what is it that we're aiming for with this work? We want to first make sure that there are diverse voices shaping the process. We want to make sure that there are intergenerational spaces where young women, adolescents, girls, and older women can really have space to engage and to interact in a meaningful way. We also hearing from much of what has been discussed today, we're also creating spaces for to strengthen legal literacy and advocacy skills for young women through workshops that have been running from November and will be running until February 2026. And finally, we want to ensure that young feminists are recognized as actors in their own right at CSW 70, with spaces that allow for actual leadership rather than token participation, which is something that we constantly hear. And so the strategy has 4 stages. First, we have the recommendation processes, and here, of course, we want to make sure that this is not only another consultation that leads up to nothing, which is a constant demand from young women. So we have been doing a series of consultations. More than 11,000 young people have contributed ahead of the December 19 deadline, and we are making sure that those priorities reach member states before negotiations begin. And we are supporting young feminists in pre-regional consultations leading to CSW 70. Then before March, we are hosting a virtual young feminist language and negotiations training that has been going on since November and will last through December, where there are 3 modules focused on deepening feminist knowledge, building advocacy and negotiation skills. That's something that came up today as well, and strengthening the global network of young feminists who can use language also as a tool for advocacy and justice. And we'll hold a preparatory briefing with the UN Youth Office on December 11th. And then in February, we'll have a 1-day virtual youth forum focused on young feminist legal activism, and particularly on access to justice, legal empowerment, traditional and transitional justice, strategic litigation, and sort of connecting all of that with the recommendations that we have been collecting from consultations. Then during CSW itself, on March 8th, we'll convene an in-person youth forum to elevate young women's leadership and ensure that intergenerational and intersectional perspectives shape the session. This will be together with the NGO CSW New York group, and we'll hold a lunchtime briefing to reflect on the status of the negotiations. Then we'll have a formal youth interactive dialogue with government delegates focused on challenges in justice system, existing gaps and barriers, and good practices in legal empowerment, transitional justice. And in partnership with the UN Youth Office, we'll also host an intergenerational discussion on innovation and good practices, grounded in the principles of non-discrimination, accountability, feminist analysis, and context specificity. And then the final area is what will happen after CSW, right? So from April to June 2026, our work in a way shifts now to really understanding and analyzing what was the influence that the inputs from young women had, and how the recommendations were incorporated and how can they be then channeled through global processes. We'll review how much youth recommendations were reflected in the delegation statements in particular and in the negotiated language, and identify the immediate next steps for follow-up, for advocacy and implementation. We'll capture the influence of young people across national, regional, and global spaces and document how partnerships with CSOs, networks, and thematic coalitions continue to influence CSW processes. And then finally, we'll track how the global youth and adolescent recommendations are being used, including in the lead up to the ECOSOC Youth Forum. So as I said, this is basically a quick overview of the processes, and I'll be happy to share the presentation with the details with you all, and also the contact details of my colleagues who couldn't be here today, and will be able to answer any questions. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. This has been so wonderful. I know we are running a little over on time, but I'm super excited to share our recording on our YouTube and share the resources that we've received around to the YLYP network and the further NGO CSW constituency. So thank you all for participating. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Emily to close us out. Thank you so much.
Um, Oh, again, thank you. I'm just kind of echo what Mads said. We did go over on this presentation, but it's such important information, and I think that it's so relevant for anyone that's joining, that wants to advocate, that's entering this space. How do I do it? How do I get involved? What are the avenues? So just such a wealth of knowledge. Many thanks to all of the presenters today, to Mads, to our office staff, everyone that made this possible. Thank you for joining us. The recording will be available on our YouTube channel. That will also be sent out in our next newsletter. Don't forget to sign up for our next monthly meeting in January 6th. Same time, same place. The presentation from Stefania and UN Women, that will also go out with the newsletter, so just keep an eye out for that. If you haven't signed up for our notifications or our newsletter, I'll get that put in the chat. And thank you. Thank you again, everyone. Lots of calls to action there. Keep up the amazing work, and we will see you next time.